Every time a narcissist blames you, they're not just shifting responsibility, they're testing whether you will surrender your power, your clarity, and your sense of self. Will you let their chaos define you? Or will you reclaim your life and stand unshaken? The narcissist's blame is not merely an act of casual criticism. It is a calculated attempt to undermine your sense of self, to destabilize your perception of reality, and to test the limits of your personal power. When someone constantly shifts responsibility onto you, it is not because they have made an occasional mistake or are having a bad day. It is because their worldview is structured around the idea that they must always be right, always dominant, and always unassailable. And when confronted with reality that challenges this narrative, they cannot integrate it without feeling threatened. So they externalize it onto others. You become the convenient target, the scapegoat upon which all of their internal disarray is projected. Understanding this dynamic is the first and crucial step toward reclaiming control over your own life. It requires a level of psychological insight that goes beyond simple observation. It demands a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about human behavior, about power, and about the fragility of the ego. When a narcissist accuses you of being at fault, it triggers a natural reaction. You feel confusion, guilt, and even self-doubt. These reactions are not signs of personal weakness, they are signs that you are human. But if you allow these feelings to dictate your actions, if you accept the blame as legitimate without critical examination, you begin to give away your personal power. You start to live according to someone else's distorted reality rather than your own. The challenge, then, is to recognize the accusation for what it truly is. A reflection of the narcissist's own incapacity to assume responsibility for their actions. It is a mirror held up to their internal chaos, and it has nothing inherently to do with you. Reclaiming your personal power in these moments requires disciplined attention to your own perception and judgment. It requires the ability to pause, to step outside of the immediate emotional response, and to analyze the situation with clarity and detachment. Ask yourself, is this accusation grounded in truth, or is it an attempt to manipulate me into accepting responsibility for something that is not mine? This is not a simple process. It demands courage, because it involves resisting a deeply ingrained social conditioning that teaches us to accept blame and seek approval from others. Most people are trained from a young age to internalize criticism, to question themselves, and to adapt their behavior to appease others. The narcissist exploits this tendency mercilessly. Maintaining your personal power also involves setting clear psychological and emotional boundaries. When you recognize the pattern of blame shifting, you can begin to disentangle your self-worth from the opinions and projections of the narcissist. This does not mean responding with hostility or aggression. It means cultivating a firm inner stance where you do not allow their distortions to dictate your perception of reality. You understand that their criticism is a tool of control, not a reflection of your true character. By establishing this internal boundary, you protect your mental and emotional energy from being consumed by someone else's disorder. Another critical aspect of maintaining personal power is the cultivation of self-awareness and self-responsibility. Ironically, the act of resisting the narcissist's blame often requires you to engage in a deeper, more honest assessment of yourself than you may have previously undertaken. You must identify your own values, your own priorities, and your own ethical framework, independent of the influence of the narcissist. This process strengthens your identity and reinforces your capacity to act intentionally rather than reactively. By grounding yourself in your own moral and psychological foundation, you create a stable center that cannot easily be shaken by external chaos. The struggle against the narcissist's blame is not simply about defending yourself in isolated incidents. It is about the long-term development of resilience, self-respect, and autonomy. Every encounter in which you resist internalizing their fault contributes incrementally to the reinforcement of your personal power. Over time, these repeated acts of psychological and emotional self-assertion accumulate, creating a robust inner structure that is difficult to destabilize. This strength does not manifest as arrogance or emotional detachment, but as a disciplined capacity to engage with the world on your own terms, to act from clarity rather than fear, and to retain a coherent sense of self even when confronted with deliberate manipulation. Recognizing the narcissist's projections as their weakness, not yours, is a transformative insight that changes the entire dynamic of your interactions. When someone consistently blames you for situations that are clearly beyond your control, it is natural to feel destabilized. You may begin to question your judgment, your perception of events, and even your value as a person. This is precisely what the narcissist intends. Their projections are designed to erode your confidence and make you dependent on their approval or validation. But when you understand that these attacks are a reflection of their internal deficiencies rather than your own failings, a profound shift occurs. Suddenly, the blame no longer carries the same weight. You begin to see it for what it truly is, a mirror of their insecurity, their inability to face their own flaws, and their relentless drive to manipulate reality in their favor. This recognition requires a clear and honest confrontation with human nature and with the mechanisms of psychological projection. Projection is a defense mechanism in which an individual attributes their own unacceptable impulses, weaknesses, or fears to someone else. In the case of a narcissist, it is magnified to an extreme degree. They are unwilling to acknowledge their own faults, so they displace them onto others. When you see this pattern for what it is, you no longer have to carry the burden of their unresolved conflicts. You realize that their criticism and blame are not accurate assessments of your behavior or character, but rather symptomatic expressions of their internal turmoil. Understanding the narcissist's projections also frees you from the emotional trap of guilt. Guilt is a powerful tool in the hands of manipulators because it can make you feel responsible for situations that are not yours to control. By recognizing that the narcissist's blame is a reflection of their own weaknesses, you can maintain emotional clarity and preserve your sense of self. You are no longer a participant in their game of distortion. You are an observer who understands the rules and refuses to be manipulated by them. This requires discipline, patience, and an unwavering commitment to truth, because the narcissist will continue to test your boundaries, provoke reactions, and attempt to draw you back into their narrative. Another critical component of this insight is the development of psychological resilience. When you accept that the projections are theirs and not yours, you begin to cultivate a form of mental armor. You can respond to their provocations without internalizing them, you can assert your boundaries without fear, and you can navigate interactions with clarity and intentionality. You learn to differentiate between legitimate criticism and manipulative attacks, and this distinction becomes a cornerstone of emotional and psychological self-preservation. This recognition also encourages a deeper understanding of the importance of self-reliance and autonomy. When you anchor your sense of self in your own perceptions and values, rather than in the distorted feedback of a narcissist, you create a stable foundation from which to operate. You no longer seek validation from someone incapable of offering it honestly, and you no longer allow their weaknesses to dictate your emotional state. This understanding transforms your interactions, making them less about reacting to manipulation and more about maintaining integrity, clarity, and control over your own life. True resilience comes from taking responsibility for your own life, not theirs. In the presence of a narcissist, it is tempting to become entangled in their chaos, to feel compelled to fix their problems, or to defend yourself endlessly against accusations and distortions. But this approach only drains your energy and erodes your sense of agency. Real resilience is not about controlling others or responding to every manipulation. It is about cultivating a grounded inner life, a stable center from which you can act deliberately rather than react impulsively. It begins with the recognition that you are responsible for your own choices, your own behavior, and your own emotional state. This recognition is not simplistic or naive. It is the cornerstone of psychological strength, because it shifts your focus from what you cannot control to what you can. And in doing so, it empowers you to navigate even the most toxic situations with clarity and purpose. Taking responsibility for your own life requires rigorous self-reflection. You must examine your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors to identify where your responses are truly yours and where they have been shaped or distorted by external pressures. When a narcissist projects blame onto you, it is an opportunity to pause and consider your own actions with honesty, without internalizing the false narrative they impose. By distinguishing between genuine self-improvement and reactionary guilt, you strengthen your capacity for autonomous action. This process is difficult because it demands an unflinching honesty that most people naturally avoid. We are often inclined to justify our reactions, to minimize our mistakes, or to attribute failures to circumstances beyond our control. Yet resilience grows precisely from the willingness to confront reality as it is, to accept your own shortcomings without defensiveness, and to act responsibly in spite of external chaos. Another crucial aspect of resilience is boundary setting. Taking responsibility for your own life does not mean accepting responsibility for the narcissist's behavior or emotions. It means clearly defining what is within your control and what is not, and refusing to allow someone else's manipulations to dictate your thoughts or feelings. Boundaries serve as both a shield and a declaration of self-respect. They protect your mental and emotional energy, allowing you to respond intentionally rather than impulsively, and they communicate, without words, that you will not participate in someone else's attempts to distort reality or shift blame. Establishing these boundaries is not a one-time act, but a continual practice, requiring vigilance and self-discipline. Resilience also involves cultivating inner resources that are independent of external validation. The narcissist thrives on creating dependency, on making you question your worth, and on undermining your confidence. By anchoring your sense of self in your own values, achievements, and moral framework, you create a stable foundation that is impervious to external manipulation. This inner stability allows you to maintain composure, clarity, and purpose even in the face of relentless criticism or projection. It transforms your relationship with challenges, turning them into opportunities for growth rather than sources of despair. Ultimately, the resilience you develop through responsibility is transformative. It is not a brittle strength based on reaction or defense. It is a durable, self-generated power that equips you to face adversity without being consumed by it. By focusing on your own agency, by cultivating honest self-reflection, and by maintaining clear boundaries, you build a life in which your identity and well-being are not contingent upon the distortions or manipulations of others. Setting boundaries and refusing to engage in blame games is one of the most powerful ways to reclaim your life from the influence of a narcissist. When someone consistently attempts to shift responsibility onto you, it can feel as though you are trapped in a cycle of accusation and self-doubt. The instinctive response is often to defend yourself, to justify your actions, or to try to reason with someone who is fundamentally unwilling to accept reality as it is. But these efforts rarely succeed. Narcissists operate not from logic or fairness, but from a deep need to control perception and maintain dominance. Engaging in their blame games only strengthens their power over you and reinforces a pattern that is difficult to break. Establishing boundaries, however, is a proactive measure that allows you to disengage from manipulation without losing integrity or composure. It is a declaration that your identity, your values, and your emotional well-being are non-negotiable, and that you will not participate in distorted narratives designed to destabilize you. The process of setting boundaries begins with self-awareness. You must recognize the ways in which the narcissist's behavior affects you, both emotionally and mentally. This requires honest reflection on your feelings, your triggers, and your patterns of response. Often, narcissists are adept at identifying and exploiting vulnerabilities, creating situations that provoke guilt, shame, or defensiveness. By understanding your own susceptibilities, you gain the ability to anticipate their tactics and respond in a controlled, deliberate manner rather than reacting impulsively. Boundaries are effective because they are grounded in self-knowledge and intentionality. They are not arbitrary rules imposed for the sake of control, but thoughtful limits that protect your psychological and emotional integrity. Once boundaries are established, enforcing them consistently is crucial. Narcissists are persistent. They will test limits, push buttons, and attempt to elicit a reaction that re-engages you in their game. If you waver, if you respond inconsistently, the boundaries lose their efficacy and the cycle of blame resumes. Consistency communicates clarity and strength. It signals that you are not available for manipulation and that your engagement is conditional on respect and honesty. Over time, this consistency creates a structural shift in the relationship dynamic. The narcissist may resist or escalate their attempts initially, but persistent adherence to boundaries ultimately diminishes their leverage. You reclaim authority over your own emotional state, your responses, and your sense of self-worth. Refusing to participate in blame games also requires a conscious commitment to emotional discipline. It involves resisting the urge to argue over every misrepresentation, to defend yourself against every false accusation, and to justify your actions to someone unwilling to see the truth. This is not passivity. It is active restraint. It requires mindfulness, patience, and a clear understanding of what is within your control and what is not. By disengaging from fruitless conflicts, you conserve energy for areas of life where your efforts have real impact and can produce meaningful change. In this context, boundaries serve as both protection and empowerment. They safeguard your mental and emotional health while simultaneously cultivating resilience, self-respect, and clarity of purpose. Every moment in which you choose to uphold a boundary reinforces your autonomy and weakens the narcissist's ability to impose chaos. The act of refusing to engage in blame games is transformative because it shifts the power dynamic. Instead of being drawn into cycles of manipulation and guilt, you assert authority over your own life, prioritize your own well-being, and demonstrate that your identity and self-worth are not negotiable. Each attempt by a narcissist to make you at fault is an opportunity to strengthen your integrity and self-worth. When faced with relentless projection and manipulation, it is easy to feel overwhelmed, disoriented, or even powerless. Narcissists are adept at exploiting insecurities, highlighting perceived flaws, and creating situations where you begin to question your judgment. Their aim is to erode your confidence and make you dependent on their approval or validation. But within this challenge lies an opportunity, a chance to examine your values, clarify your principles, and reinforce the foundation of your identity. By recognizing that the blame is not a reflection of your true character, you can respond with intentionality rather than reactively absorbing the toxicity directed at you. This process begins with self-awareness. To strengthen your integrity, you must understand the distinction between legitimate feedback and manipulative projection. Not every criticism is false, but when patterns emerge where responsibility is repeatedly shifted onto you regardless of circumstance, it is essential to discern the source. The narcissist's accusations are rarely about truth, they are about control. Understanding this distinction allows you to respond with confidence and maintain alignment with your own ethical framework. Each interaction becomes a test of your commitment to personal values and your capacity to navigate adversity without compromising your principles. Building self-worth in the face of projection requires cultivating a strong sense of internal validation. Narcissists thrive when they can make you question your worth, turning self-doubt into a tool of control. By anchoring your self-esteem in your own achievements, principles, and moral compass rather than external approval, you create resilience. This does not mean ignoring mistakes or refusing to grow, but it means separating constructive self-improvement from manipulation. When you internalize this perspective, the narcissist's attempts at blame lose their potency. Your sense of self-worth becomes independent of their judgments, and your integrity becomes unshakable because it is grounded in your own understanding of who you are and what you stand for. Another essential component is the disciplined practice of emotional regulation. Narcissists often provoke reactions designed to unsettle you, creating opportunities for them to exploit anger, guilt, or frustration. By maintaining composure, you prevent their chaos from dictating your emotional state. Emotional discipline reinforces self-respect because it demonstrates that your responses are chosen, deliberate, and consistent with your values rather than dictated by external manipulation. Over time, this practice strengthens resilience, allowing you to navigate challenging interactions without losing your sense of self. Finally, every encounter with the narcissist becomes a practical exercise in fortifying boundaries and asserting autonomy. Each time you resist absorbing unjust blame, maintain clarity in your perception, and act in accordance with your principles, you reinforce your identity and your self-worth. The accumulation of these conscious decisions gradually transforms the power dynamic. You are no longer defined by the distortions of someone else's disorder. Instead, you define yourself through consistent action, moral integrity, and unwavering commitment to your own values, turning every challenge into an opportunity to emerge stronger, wiser, and more self-assured than before.